give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I am your ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as always, is your co-ghost, Tim Brayton. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing real good. How are you doing?
Good. Well,
Oh,
no, I am internally fine. Externally, I am living a David Cronenberg movie.
please
You
share.
know how?
Should we talk about your life rather than this movie? Maybe it sounds like.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. It is definitely more frightening. So we'll get into what this show is, what we're doing this month, whatever. But spooky season is over in spirit, but not in my body. So you know how Carrie kind of likes to start the show with just a series of calamities that have befallen her.
I mean, we all like that, but yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of just, I feel like I've been living the Carrie lifestyle. I won't be able to represent my life in as dazzling a way as she does in her storytelling, but I'll give it a shot. So it's really gross. I will warn you now. Not like that gross, but just like the type of minor gross things that will ick you out more than something big, like, in a movie when someone gets decapitated or whatever.
Okay, well, again, I need to talk about something gross because I'm not going to be doing it once we get talking about the movie. So
Yeah, exactly. So, as I told you before we started recording, it is currently Santa Ana wind season here in Southern California, where I live. Still sunny Southern California. It was like 85 degrees yesterday. It's fucking November.
it snowed on Halloween in Madison.
That sounds really neat. I know that's wrong.
I'm
and
glad.
bad.
I'm glad you think it sounds neat. I think it sounds neat that your city is going to catch on fire because of dry wind.
Yeah, look, I celebrated Halloween by tracking a bead of sweat from my armpit down to my elbow and down to the floor like 30 times in a row because it was fucking hot as balls. Anyway, in addition to being hot, it is incredibly dry. We are in Santa Ana wind season, which makes the state into a tinderbox, but it also makes my incredibly delicate and sensitive, just sad white person skin very not happy. So my feet have a bit of a rough skin thing going on. So when I get into bed, they're kind of scratching against the sheets and is incredibly unpleasant. One of the less good things that my feet have felt in my life. So I decided to finally pull the trigger on this quote unquote foot mask.
Chopped off your feet.
I did. I just hobbled myself like a misery. But yeah, no, so I had this foot mask thing that I had bought at Target like 2 years ago, and this happened 2 years ago, and just never found the time to do it. So basically, I watched an episode of 90210. I sat with my feet encased in this chemical mush that was supposed to exfoliate and smoothify my skin. And I got done with it, and I rinsed it all off, and I was like, okay, that feels like 15% smoother. Awesome. Great. And then about 2 days later, the entire bottom layer of skin on my feet has decided to fall off. Like if you've had a really bad sunburn and then your skin starts to flake and you can kind of rub your hand along it and just kind of roll it into little balls.
Mm-hmm.
In the shower, I was washing my feet and like half of the skin of my feet just came off, and it's been ungreat. But then because of whatever, combination of environmental calamities that's going on here, one night I got messily devoured by a mosquito, and I have like 8 or 9 just incredibly potent, like throbbing bug bites on both of my legs.
Okay.
And last night I was lying in bed, and just the itching was going on, and I just could not get to sleep and be freed from my torment. So at like in the middle of the night, I got up, I went to the bathroom, and I started applying my I have this itch cream, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna load up my ankles, put on these big tall socks, just kind of lock it all in there, just be a slimy boy for the night, and just live with it. But as I was doing that, because my skin is so dry elsewhere, my knuckles started bleeding spontaneously. And it's just, it's a real domino effect of torment and chaos and bodily dysfunction right now. It's not been very fun.
So Here's my sort of immediate question after all that story. You work a job that is 100% remote. Is that correct?
That is correct. I don't even know if they have an office anywhere.
So why not just spend a month not in Southern California?
Do you have
tour?
a spare room?
I don't, but surely you can, trade services for a room for a month. I don't know.
I mean, maybe. I did go to Canada briefly for
Well, there you
during
go.
the summer, but
Good place to be. Canada's a fine place.
yeah, no, I truly don't know where I would go. All the family who likes me lives in Southern California too, so we're all screwed.
Rough. That's rough.
Yeah, but no, I will consider that because it is between like July and mid-November. It is unlivable here.
And I mean, I've been there in June, and I have to argue that I don't know that it's livable in June either.
Oh, trust me, it gets worse. Okay. And then when it's 100 degrees and everything's on fire, so you can't have the windows open because the smoke will get in.
Things would be 100 degrees when it's on fire. That's kind of how it works.
No, it's 100 degrees in a vacuum, and then the fire comes. Okay. And then the smoke creates a kind of fishbowl effect on the sky and traps all the heat, and you have to have all the windows closed, and because otherwise you will maybe not die of smoke inhalation, but like just have a pretty bad time of it.
Sure.
And then you slowly broil yourself to death. Also, it's really exciting at all times during the California summer, which again lasts until Thanksgiving.
That is inhumane, and I have no idea how that came to be the second largest city in North America.
Hollywood, baby.
I guess. I mean, you gotta have that sunshine to make the movies, I guess.
Yeah, well, it doesn't rain here. They had to be outside with their big giant cameras, and they were like,
This is exactly true. Exactly true.
It's no longer the case, but whatever. Anyway, we're here. We're queer. Talking about Cold Prey, 2006. This is a new month. Spooky season / October is over. We decided in honor, with tremendous respect and gratitude for the release of Eli Roth's Thanksgiving later in the month, we'd be covering 21st century kind of throwback slashers. So Patreon people voted for us to talk about Cold Prey, and we're going to fucking do it.
We are sure going to attempt to.
Yeah. I am coming from, I think, a sadder place here because I watched Cold Prey in my freshman year of college and really, really enjoyed it, and was excited to return to see it again for this viewing. And you know how some movies can grow on you? Well, this one really shrank on me, and that was disappointing. But you were a first-time watch. How did that treat you?
I'm a first-time watch. I found it to be incredibly fine.
Yes.
Like, there's very little with this movie that I would say, well, that wasn't good. That was wrong of this movie. But the overall experience was so normal to me.
Yeah. It's or mundane. Like, it's just very...
Mundane. There's a word for it.
Yeah, it's like eating a Nilla wafer. You're like, oh, that was a cookie.
It was, exactly.
It wasn't dipped in banana pudding, which is the way to elevate a vanilla wafer. It just existed, and it did exactly the thing it said it was going to do, but it still wasn't quite satisfying.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And when I say it's fine, I don't necessarily mean that it's like bad, but it's not doing anything that sort of hooks my imagination and makes me feel like, ooh, I liked that moment. I felt good about that. I want more of that. It's the most this is a slasher, I feel, of any slasher film I've seen from the 21st century. And that's not nothing, right? Like, there's a kind of pure beauty to it, that it is so much just a slasher film.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was received so well in 2006, and so well by me at the time. I was watching it probably in 2012, but we were still not in a strong place for a proper slasher.
And I don't know that we're really in a terribly strong place for a proper slasher now. But I will also have to say that now that the film itself is 17 years old, it feels less like a good to see we can still make these nowadays, and more of a, well, I'm going to go back 17 years. Why don't I just go back, say, 27 years and just watch or I guess that would be 37 years, and just watch an old movie, an old slasher movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it loses the. I think it thrived on its context, and divorced from that context, it's just not as interesting as it could be.
Like I would certainly like to see a film like this new in a theater today, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like Hellfest was kind of like that, like a very meat and potatoes slasher movie that you go and see and you're never going to think about again, but it was nice to be in a theater watching people get stabbed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, for all I'm bagging on the movie, like, again, it's working. If the thing that you require it to do is to be this sort of platonic ideal of a slasher, I can point to some quibbles, I can point to some dislikes, but it works. The movie does what it sets out to do.
Yeah, and was it Howard Hawks who said that a good movie is 3 good scenes and no bad scenes?
That is correct. I mean, that's the he's the one who gets that quote ascribed to him. Whether he said it, I can't say, but that's what people say. Yeah,
he didn't say it to you.
Not personally, no.
Okay, but yeah, this movie it is merely no bad scenes. And maybe there's ones you could quibble on, ones that aren't great or that are worse, but it is baseline for the most part.
That is such a smart way of phrasing this. I'm just kind of living with that for a moment, because it is a movie with no bad scenes. And does it have any great scenes at all? And I want to say that it has some very good scenes, at least.
Yeah, it has some very good scenes. It has one or two, maybe just one, but like great shots, I think.
And I do think we should, acknowledge that, and we'll get into it when we start talking about the movie in more detail. But let us describe this movie. Not that there's a ton more to describe than we've done, because it is such a slasher movie that, like, to a certain extent we've already described the plot when we say that. But I think it's probably worth kind of pinning down. Did either of us mention, because now I can't recall, did either of us mention that this is a Norwegian film?
I feel like I did, but the second I finished that sentence, I had that doubt as well. So yeah, we should establish that again.
So it is Norwegian, and in that sense, it is possibly, that is the novelty. Kind of. My feeling is that if one wants to watch this movie in the United States and has scruples that prevent one from breaking that law, this is a movie that can only be watched dubbed in the United States. Is that how you saw it?
The DVD that I have is in Norwegian with English subtitles.
Okay.
I have heard horror stories of streaming this movie, but it is available for purchase, and I don't imagine the DVD is particularly expensive.
Okay, yeah, because when I was looking to watch it, the places that I saw it were all offering it in dubbed English, and my immediate response was, well, that's not happening. So it fell off a truck, damnedest thing, right when I needed it to.
That is
to
very
be there,
nice.
just plopped on my front porch. But I did watch it in Norwegian, and and part of me feels that that's just very unfortunate, that this movie's primary point of novelty is that it is a Norwegian film, and it continues to be a Norwegian film even if it's in dubbed English, but I feel that kind of lacquers over one of its primary points of distinction, which is that you're watching this formula express itself in subtitled Norwegian, or not subtitled if you speak Norwegian.
Yeah, exactly. No, that is very true. But also it benefits greatly from the specific Norwegian setting that it has. So we should get into it. So I have looked up how to say a lot of these people's names. I'm not gonna nail it perfectly. But yeah, so this is
I
from.
believe it or not, this is going to sound like either a weird flex or some sort of like strange nightmare moment. I studied Norwegian in high school
What?
for a year. I took Norwegian. I was like, that sounds like a more fun language than a practical one, and I like doing things that are fun and not practical, which is why I had to take 2 years of language in undergrad, because they were like, no, Norwegian doesn't count. Are you fucked in the head? So I did take a year of Norwegian, so I can actually probably help with some of these pronunciations.
Okay, excellent.
I also have seen all the Bergman films, and Swedish and Norwegian are basically the same language.
Yeah, Swedish is okay. So Swedish is kind of like the sound of Swedish is kind of like a Muppet falling down the stairs, and the sound of Norwegian is kind of like a Muppet rolling down a hill.
Yes.
But they're very similar.
There is an argument to be made. I think some linguists have made this, that Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish are not sufficiently distinctive to be called different languages, that they're all just basically dialects of each other.
Mm. So. Oh yeah, that is interesting, and it's kind of like, this is not necessarily the case with Spanish and Portuguese, but there's so much overlap between those languages. Like Portuguese is kind of like if you left Spanish out in the sun for too long.
Well, yeah, because Portuguese has all those really super unintuitive pronunciations.
Yes, but once if you hear it spoken, it sounds quite similar to Spanish. Or you can translate in your head at least 70% of it.
Sure.
But yeah, so anything to not talk about Coldplay. Okay, so this was directed by Roar Utau. You may know him from directing 2018's Tomb Raider, but you may not, because nobody saw that.
I will say this: when I clicked on his Letterboxd page and I saw that I had already seen one of his films, I was quite stunned. But I did see that Tomb Raider.
Yeah, me too. In theaters, baby. He did also direct the Netflix movie Troll, which was kind of a hit earlier this year. I was actually on tap to review that for Alternate Ending, but I started it and turned it off halfway through because it was so goddamn boring.
I remember this happening, and that's exciting, and does not encourage me to go watch Troll.
But anyway, it's getting a sequel, which might be called Troll 2.
That is dancing with the devil. That is a dangerous game to play.
Yeah. Oh, it's a wild time. Anyway, so this movie is about 5 Norwegian college age or maybe post-college young adults who are going on an extreme snowboarding trip.
Are not all snowboarding trips extreme?
They are, but this one is extra extreme.
That's very true.
They're going away from the tourist traps to this kind of untouched mountain in the middle of Norway that looks beautiful and formidable. So we've got, some rather basic archetypes with a little bit more shading than normal, but we've got Mikael and Ingunn. They are the requisite horny couple, but Ingunn is actually like a little more. She gets a lot more characterization than the average. Slasher.
Like it's kind of cool, and to the point that they are archetypes, but they are all themes and variations on their archetypes, and it feels like the archetypes are there more to sort of give us a place to start than to just like be done with the work of character building. I loved that the horny couple girl is also explicitly a virgin.
Yeah, she's explicitly a virgin. She's like dealing with these weird feelings of being in love with this guy and being horny for this guy. There's a lot going on with Ingunn.
It is so much deeper than the ordinary horny girl in a slasher film, and I admire the film for just putting in the legwork to make that happen, to give us a character that does not end up being, I think, more interesting to watch, but she is more of a human being.
Yeah, which is really nice. And yeah, she's not flashing herself in the mirror and going, "It's showtime," which is pleasurable in its own right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we also have another couple. We have Eirik and Jannica. Jannica is played by the only actor here who I would say really matters outside of Norway, Ingrid Bolsa Bardell. And matters is a strong word. She was in Chernobyl Diaries and the Hercules movie with The Rock.
Those were both movies.
Yeah, but she was also in Westworld for like 11 episodes. That's a show that people like. Yeah, she's the only one that anyone has probably had, and a casual viewer has potentially had a chance of seeing her in something.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so their thing is that Yannicka is a little bit nervous about potentially, committing extra hard to Eirik and moving in together with him, even though he has asked. And then we have the kind of resident incel nerd character, Morten Tobias, who is nursing a massive, throbbing, unrequited crush on Yannicka that makes itself very known.
Yes, indeed it does. Yes, indeed. And again,
Yeah.
in the sort of they have made this character more watchable than they needed to. He gets a moment when they're driving up the mountain and they're all sort of, he's sitting next to the horny couple making out in a way that is just not appropriate. They're in public. But he makes a joke about how he doesn't need a girlfriend because he can masturbate whenever he wants. And it's obviously like a tawdry slasher movie joke, but it's also sort of a charming character beat in a way to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
The specific way it's expressed.
Yeah, and I'd be curious about culturally the way that Morten Tobias's character plays in Norway. Especially this is 2006, but this is also a European milieu, not an American milieu. Like, there are certain things that he says or does that wouldn't fly these days in an American movie. But I'm not sure exactly how they are meant to be taken. Like,
Right.
there is this moment that plays as really charming in the movie where, I'm skipping over a major plot point that I'll come back to in a second. But for reasons we're about to get to, Eirik and Yannicka are helping Morten Tobias pee. Mm-hmm. And he's just like begging either of them to look at his dick, just like as a joke, as a prank. Mm-hmm. Like, it's right here. Why don't you look? And it's played very charming, and it comes off very charming. But that's just definitely something that would play differently.
And that, I think, is more of just the European of it. I think that there's a sense in which public nudity is not as big a deal. I mean, it's obviously like you don't just see people's dicks flopping out, but I feel like that is very much a cultural thing. I think that even today that would probably be a joke that would play differently in Europe than it would here.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking. But anyway, I'll circle back to that. But anyway, so what happens is while they are snowboarding on this forgotten mountain that Eirik has brought them to, it's got shades of The Descent in its early going, where it's like, we got to go to the most extreme place that no one's ever mapped or whatever. But anyway, so Morten Tobias, who is clearly not as skilled as the rest of them and has been nervous this whole time, he ends up cracking his leg, like bone sticking out of the skin. Very, very gross. Really, is this the only proper gore in the movie?
It is the only proper gore that is an effect attached to one of the actors' bodies. It is not the only proper blood.
Yes, that is true. But anyway, so he can't just get back to the car. It's a little too late for Eirik to get back to the car and drive to the village to go get help.
Because it's Norway in the winter, so daylight's only like 3 hours long.
Yeah, presumably. But luckily, they find an abandoned ski lodge on their side of the mountain that they can hole up in for the night. We see, the characters kind of bouncing off each other, having a good time in the lodge, and trying to help Morten Tobias with his wound. And
they get the generator up and running so they can have music playing, and it's just a sort of good little silly hanging out time.
It sure is. And they do discover that the rooms in this hotel are basically inside a meat locker. It's this like horrible metal Texas chainsaw hallway that might just be how Norway hotels look, but it is gross. But they do discover evidence that there was maybe a fire and there was a bloody escape from this fire in some way. But as far as they can tell, the hotel's been closed down for 30 years.
It would appear that, closed in 1975 is the most recent evidence of human habitation they can find. And and the movie does something I think that's very weird to me, which, not weird, but so it opens, It actually opens with one of those scenes that I would describe as being pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. Where we see this young boy in very overexposed, very white, blown-out footage, like racing through the snow, looking back over his shoulder towards the camera, clearly in some sort of distress. And then that cuts to the sort of, not Seven-esque per se, but the kind of like ugly montage of horrible news stories type credits that feel very, very typical of a sort of grimy, grungy horror movie. And then after the credits are done, it is not horror movie. Like, there's nothing moody or scary or tense. Like, this is not one of those films where the characters are racing through the snow and then we like pan across like a squirrel that's been crucified or anything, but they don't see it, but we do, so we know something's out there. Like, it is just really not doing anything for a fairly long stretch of its running time to remind us that we are watching a slasher film and that we knew that when we got into it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And no one's sneaking up behind the other one and going, boo. That does happen, I believe.
That does happen one time.
But
that's almost not even staged as a scare moment. It's almost staged more as a character beat.
Yeah, and it comes at the part where they are starting to build in some of the creepy backstory of this hotel. But I think that that credit sequence that you're talking about is tremendously effective because it's all different news stories about people going missing in the mountains and horrible things happening, and it's just they're all unrelated, but it's all just death and loneliness, and just it's highlighting just the fact that these mountains are formidable. The mountains themselves are a danger, even if there is nothing else dangerous out there with them.
Exactly.
And that's incredibly effective. It is doing the thing that the following year's The Hitcher remake would try to do, where it's like, on the open road, 20,000 people die a year, but in a way that actually builds atmosphere and has a point.
It is weird that we watched The Hitcher together like 6 weeks ago, and I could not tell you anything that happens in it until you just said that. I was like, oh, I haven't seen The Hitcher in like 15 years. Wait, no, that's not true.
No, that's the thing I remember the most because it's so overemphasized.
Well, because it happens first before you've had a chance to lose interest in the movie.
Yeah, so I remember that, and I remember Move Along. So that, and then it's just a bunch of fuzz. But anyway, so yeah, that's a tremendously effective opening sequence. You are correct, and you're right. Yeah, we're mostly just seeing them interact and have fun, and obviously they're dealing with a challenge. But Yannicka seems pretty well suited to handle this challenge on the medical side. Eirik seems pretty well suited to handle the physical side and the like survivalism side. Mm-hmm. Ingun and Mikal just want to fuck, but they're having a good time too. And overall, they're just putting things together, but wouldn't you know it, there is a big, grimy, gross mountain man who lives in this scary little room in the basement, and he might not be so happy to have visitors.
He's very concerned that they're in his place, and he would like them to leave his place. And he has two ways he could go about doing this. He could either make his presence known and ask them to leave, possibly after having begrudgingly provided medical attention, or he could start murdering them with his pickaxe.
Guess which one he chooses. And then they get murdered with the pickaxe. Quite obviously, even though we do get to spend a little bit of nice time with Ingun, Yannicka is the final girl. She is not especially well equipped to be a final girl, but she is both. She is the right combination of capable and lucky to make it out of this situation.
That is exactly how I felt about it. Like, she is not someone who has the unique set of skills that we need for her to be a final girl, except that she is attentive to her surroundings. And so she is able to take advantages of the moments where luck breaks her way.
Exactly.
And I'd say that is kind of her like qualification to be the final girl.
Which is fair enough. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're dealing with here. I do want to kind of circle back around on the fact that I do think the characters are the reason to watch this movie, or the reason that this movie rises, other than the setting, which we'll talk about more. The characters in the setting are the reason that this movie does anything different than the average meat and potato slasher.
I would agree. And, you know, we'll get to all sorts of different places, I'm sure. I liked Yannicka as a final girl. Like, I wouldn't say that I liked the final girl sequence, quote unquote, but I liked her. I thought she was an interestingly sturdy character for this kind of genre. And it's a pleasure to watch that kind of character navigate this kind of situation compared to the usual screaming ninny who seems to have survived only because, well, she's the one screaming ninny who hasn't had sex, which is, I think, how a lot of slasher films play out. Yannicka feels like she would have been sort of the one you would pick to survive in advance if you knew these 5 characters, because, like, well, she seems resourceful, but also doesn't have that kind of, like, I'm a boy, I'm going to show off energy that Eric has.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's very true. I do think I got a little frustrated with her this time because she's a little slow on the uptake that they are actively in danger. Like, Ingun has been theoretically, she's fighting with Mikal and she's not answering the door when they knock. And then they discover the creepy evidence dungeon that the killer lives in that's full of wedding rings he's stolen from people he's murdered.
The wedding rings came too early, given how they were still not done with the slow burn. That should have been the point at which something pivoted in the movie, and it doesn't.
Yeah, so the period between that and the actual pivot, it's a little bit like, Yannicka, what the fuck are you doing? Like, there's a part where she's walking down to Ingun's room, and she's, like, trailing her hand along the doors and kind of humming a little song to herself. And I'm like, no, this is not the time. Get your friends out of there. But yes, once those pieces click in at the right moment, she's completely capable. But you're right, the final girl sequence itself is not anything really special. But she's a compelling presence and does a couple interesting things.
Yeah, but you were going to talk about the characters writ large, and I kind of latched onto her immediately because I do think she's definitely the best performance. But I think it's worth saying the characters do work. Like, again, they're all types, and I think in the particular case of Mikal, he's a type who has very little shading. Like, he is, to me, the character of the 5 that I have the least sense of.
Yes.
But certainly
he's
the other 4. He's a fuckboy. And it's even sort of like flagged a little bit early on that he is the new boyfriend and they still haven't quite moved past, I sure like making out with you, to let's talk about what your personality is like. So that's okay, in a sense. It's justified in the narrative.
Yeah. And like I said, so pretty much all the characters except for him, there's a little bit of something extra going on. Not a lot, but there's a little bit. I would say the person I gravitated towards the first time I watched this was Morten Tobias, because I was a lot more forgiving of, like, desperate pining losers when I was a freshman in college, and I couldn't tell you why, Tim. But, like, you recently just watched He Knows You're Alone, right? The 1980 slasher with Tom Hanks.
I did.
I also had a soft spot for the love interest in that movie, who's like the geeky mortician guy who likes the girl, and that has not carried through.
No, I will say, in a way that I do still like Morten Tobias, the character in He Knows You're Alone, you must have been in a space. You just must have been in some dark mental place if you found that character appealing.
I think I must have been. But anyway, so I have really turned tail in a run from that kind of character archetype. So Morten Tobias does less for me on rewatch than he did originally. So I was that was another part of this where I was like, oh, this is doing a considerably less for me than the first time I watched it.
And that's legit. I did not find him to be... I thought he was a sad little boy, and I feel bad for him. And he was never my favorite character, but I can see where he would be sort of more easier to at least, like, not root for necessarily, but easier to sort of find him to be trying to make the best of just a generally shitty pileup of things in his life that's going on right now. Because he's also the one who breaks his leg, and he's trying to be like, he's trying to be friendly and jovial, and it's not that big a deal, but he's also got to basically be carted around absolutely everywhere. That's what the peeing scene is about, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, so there is that. But another thing that did not age particularly well for me for this movie was the very 2006 cinematography. Do you
Wowie,
want?
wowie, wow. You know, I watched this film on a rip of a Norwegian DVD. I pirated it. I'm not gonna say the cinematography should have lived up to my standards in those circumstances, but this is an ugly movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as ugly as the like just crude, primitive digital cinematography of like 28 Days Later, which was
But
what,
that's a movie that's doing it. That's a movie that's like,
Yeah.
what if we made this filthy looking video smear of a movie?
yeah, but I guess well maybe this is more on the level of like that Dawn of the Dead remake where it's just kind of like very sheeny, shiny.
It's very shiny. It's very like I kept trying to figure out if it was desaturated or if they were just pointing the camera at washed out looking things because they are Norwegians, so you know who's to say.
Yeah,
But it's so soft. The colors are so white.
yeah, it's so white and it's but it does have this kind of like mottled blue green filter that's kind of ugly
It
too.
does, and there's an inevitable point where a pool of blood exists because the mountain man has started killing folk, and the blood is pooling beneath them as it will, and like a locket is pulled out of this pool of blood, and the blood has that like jet black look of like blood that's in a movie that's kind of drawing on that like industrial cinematography feel, and it's just bad. I just really didn't care for it.
Yeah, it's largely unpleasant to watch, and I think that it happens upon some good compositions when it is dealing with the mountain because it's hard to make those beautiful
It's a
Norwegian
great
mountains
ass
look bad.
location.
Yeah.
It is a staggeringly good location is the thing. And like you set the camera down there, you don't even really have to do anything. You just point the camera at it and hope that you're in focus, and boom, instant like powerful overwhelming isolation.
Yes, exactly. And I think the white of the snowy mountain works well with whatever color timing they have going on here.
It absolutely does. And like it's great because the sky and the snow sort of mush into each other, and that's partially because the snow is like being all swirled up in the wind and the snowfall and whatnot. So like that's great stuff. Don't want to belittle any of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the magic of location. They just went to a fucking mountain that was next door and, shot a movie. I do think they really miss a huge opportunity to really throw some blood on that snow. I don't think we get almost any blood on snow action.
We don't get that I can recall any blood splatters. You know, the like someone screams, we cut to a shot of a thing, and then we see blood like hit it.
Yeah.
Good old fashioned meat and potato slasher filmmaking. I don't think that happens even once, does it?
Not that I can recall. I watched this a couple days ago, and you watched it last night, so I will trust your memory over mine. But it's just really disappointing. In all cases, I would point to the other mid-2000s Norwegian horror movie Dead Snow as a much better example of all of these things done in an exciting way.
It is, and thank you for reminding me of that, because my sort of impulse throughout had been, this is a European movie, right? And there's some positives to that, which is that it's going to have more interesting character work with more naturalistic sort of figures, and it's going to feel a little bit more sort of grounded and humane in that sense than an American film. But then the price we have to pay is that since it's not New French Extremity, we're just not going to get that kind of like prurient, you want blood, here's some blood quality that you get in an American horror movie. But then, as you point out, yes, we did get that in a film from this country from around the same time. So it's just this movie.
Yeah, it's just this movie, and I think Roar Uthaug maybe just is boring. That is my new theory.
I have a skill set. I have a sample set of 2, but it feels that's at least a reasonable argument to make out of those 2 movies.
Yeah, it just seems a little more staid. Like, okay, wait. So, if you know Norwegian, do you know how to pronounce a W in Norway? Because there's like the Dead Snow director is like Tommy Wirkola. It might be. Is it Wirkola or Furkola?
I think it's sort of V-ish, It's not like the German V where it's like that harsh sort of V, but I think it is kind of like a V.
Okay. But yeah,
Tommy
so
Wirkola.
Wirkola. Okay, yeah, Tommy Wirkola. He's the Sam Raimi of Norway, and Roar just does not. Even though his name in English is spelled Roar, he's not a loud filmmaker. He's just very stolid.
I permitted myself for one appearance of his name. Well, his name only appears once, but I permitted myself briefly to pretend that his name was Roar until I was like, "It's Roar." That's too bad. But no, if Tommy Wirkola is the Sam Raimi of Norway, Roar Utar is like the Sean Cunningham. That's not fair.
That's a little rude. Maybe he's the Steve Miner.
He's the Steve Miner. He's the Steve Miner of Norway.
Yeah. But yeah, he's just much more of a workman, journeyman kind of director. Yeah. Anyway, I want to say nice things about this movie. Let me scroll through my notes a little bit. I do think that metal hallway is a good horror location.
It's a good location. It's definitely a good location.
Yeah, it's probably the only one of the interiors that feels jarring and strange to me in the same way that the mountain does.
I agree, because like one of the things that I think this movie it's the closest this movie comes to just absolutely not working. The scene where they discovered that burned out bedroom, that is a scene played with no gravity. And that would be, I think, the biggest moment where they have an interior space that should have been creepy, should have been ominous, and just came off as totally flat and point the camera to record the thing you're pointing it at. Very pedestrian image making. So that is the moment that if anything in this film I would say was bad, it was that interior. But no, I agree. In terms of the interiors, the hallway is quite creepy and uncanny.
Yeah. But of course, this does lead me to another thing that I didn't like quite as much, is that I think the geography of this movie is a little challenging. Like, I was constantly finding myself trying to figure out which floor of the hotel they were on. Like, they walk from the lobby to this hallway, but then later it turns out that the hallway that they're in is on the second floor. And I don't know if the lobby's on the second floor. I was just constantly second-guessing myself in the way that the geography of the space was actually set up.
Sure.
But anyway, I was talking about nice things.
I got a nice thing.
Yeah, go for it.
Mountain Man's a cool design.
It is a cool design because it's like as you're looking at it, you're like, okay, there's a face in there, and then as you keep peering, you're like, there's not really.
It's not really a
anything.
face.
Yeah.
It's more like sort of a canvas mask with goggles and a sort of. It almost feels like if Leatherface wasn't a cannibal who skinned his victims and wore their faces, but was just like a guy who tried to cobble together a face out of old pants or something.
Yeah, corduroy or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like it's both very creepy because it's uncanny and not human, but not creepy because it's not violent. It's not like perverse. It's just weird because you have this person who's like kind of half-assed his way into a face analog.
Yeah, like you can't you kind of slip off of him, your eyes, but his face is almost unimportant. Like the thing that is important is that he is just a fucking giant, bulky man.
Yes.
And that does make him feel very intimidating and make it seem like more of a challenge to escape his wrath.
Indeed. And I think it is another error this movie makes. Like, they keep him off screen for a very long time. That's not an error. That's just horror movie 101. Once we know that he's there, we still don't get to see him very much. And it's not like he's a bad effect that they need to keep off camera. He's just kind of... We see, like, shoulder blades and arms and mass, but we don't really get to, like, see him only in a handful of shots, really. And that's a bummer, because I think he's got a good presence.
Yeah, and that prevents him from really making that much of an impression, which is a bummer. Like, Cold Prey is a franchise. There is a sequel and a prequel, but I don't think... What?
I was going to... Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I don't... So Yannicka does come back in Cold Prey 2, and I think that's the hook, because it's like, oh, witness the return of Mountain Man? Like, he's not a presence that feels worth following beyond the fact that he does look creepy.
But I mean, would Jason Voorhees have felt like that if all you knew was Friday the 13th Part 2? We at least get a very good makeup reveal.
Yeah, there's a good
Friday
makeup
the 13th
reveal.
Part 2.
The Baghead is not uncreepy, and you do get to spend time with it.
That's true.
It's less iconic than the hockey mask, but it is an image where it's like, that's this guy, and also the town that dreaded sundown. But like, you know, whatever. Sorry, what were you saying?
Well, I was going to say, we should acknowledge the first two movies, not so much the third movie. These were incredibly big hits in Norway. Like, the second Cold Prey set the opening weekend record in Norway.
Oh, I did not know that.
Isn't that... Imagine that happening. Like, imagine, I don't know, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 being, like, the opening weekend record holder.
Okay. I don't know what Norwegian cinema is like very much outside of horror.
There's not a ton of it. I think they mostly rely on Sweden to make their movies.
Yeah, that's really interesting, though. Okay.
This was a crazy, crazy big hit. The sequel, I don't actually know that the sequel ended up being a bigger hit. It had, obviously, that huge opening weekend. But no, these were big deal movies.
Yeah, and they did spill over to the U.S. in a way that I would say is unusual for that pocket of Europe.
Right. I mean, it's basically this and Dead Snow are like the two, like, quote unquote big Norwegian horror films in the States.
Yeah, for sure. I would absolutely. I would not qualify that at all. Obviously, it's within the horror fandom. But like I think if I picked 100 people on the street at a West Hollywood Halloween party, one of them has heard of Cold Prey.
Sure.
I don't know. That's how I like to measure things.
The West Hollywood Halloween party quotient.
Anyway, yeah. That is really interesting. And yeah, it's this mini franchise. Cold Prey 3 tragically has never gotten a proper release in the States. But the first two are floating around everywhere. You can find them.
And I'm confident I can make that happen for you. I could probably find it on the same truck where I found this movie.
Oh, but, I know where to find it. I may even have a copy. I just haven't pulled the trigger.
Sure.
It's one of those things where it's like, back in 2012, I was like, I gotta get my hands on this movie, and it wasn't available then to me, or I didn't know how to find it. And once it became available, I was just like, it's been more than half a decade. My blood has cooled on watching this. I've got other things to do.
Sure.
But I'll pull the trigger at some point. I do think my boyfriend wants to watch Cold Prey 2 because he watched this one with me and enjoyed it enough.
I can imagine. I have certainly seen worse slasher trilogies than I anticipate the Cold Prey trilogy being. So I can certainly imagine in the next few months sweeping up the other two as well.
Yeah, and so like I said, I watched the original Cold Prey and Cold Prey 2 over a decade ago. But in my memory, thinking back on Cold Prey, I was kind of like, I feel like I'm gonna like it less when I watch it again. Like I had that feeling in my heart. But thinking about Cold Prey 2, I liked it a little less at the time, but I think I might like it more now, and I'm hoping my instinct stays true in that way. So that would be nice.
Indeed.
Anyway, do you have anything else kind towards Cold Prey you want to throw out there?
I have something that's neither kind nor positive. It's just
Okay.
a fun fact, and I like fun facts, and I think it is important for us as Americans watching a subtitled movie to sort of acknowledge. So this movie's title in Norwegian, which initially I liked less, but the more I lived with it, I think I like it more. So the title in Norwegian is Fritt Vilt, which literally means free game, which is basically the Norwegian term that we would say open season. So it's like a hunting reference, and I feel like that's a little blunter and a little more straightforward, but also a little maybe less cutesy than Cold Prey. So I think I like it as a title.
Maybe. Is Cold Prey a pun on something?
I mean, based on our Letterboxd feeds, friend of the show, Gavin McDowell, certainly believes that it's a pun on the existence of an American alt-rock band.
Are you talking about Cold Plague? Yeah, because they're British. Yeah,
British. Yes, British American. I don't like them either way, so I don't pay attention.
I guess they were huge in 2006. That feels random though. I feel like any movie that has Prey in the title is just a totally opaque pun to me. Like that movie Prey for the Devil last year. I was like, it just doesn't quite click for anything.
But it's not opaque. You understand what the pun was meant to be.
Well, yeah, the pun's meant to be... Well, that one, it's clear. It's meant to be Prey for the Devil, which also doesn't really make any sense, though.
Right.
This one, it's less clear that there's an analog anywhere or why it would be the case. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because that's the title I knew it under first, but it just feels more right to me.
Fair enough.
Because do you hunt on a cold, frozen, dead mountain?
If you're Norwegian, I don't know that you have another option.
I guess so. I wouldn't know.
And I mean, he is hunting them. They are being hunted by him.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is true. Maybe I'll come around too. I need the time that you took to really reflect on my feelings about it. What else is going on here? Did you see the Room 237 reference?
I read after I'd seen it that there was a Room 230 reference, but 237, but it did not register for me in the moment. No. Yeah,
no, I saw because there's like a big shot of the room number on the door that they open, and it's 237. I'm like, I get it. There's also, let me tell you, the score here. I don't know if reference is even the right word, but we got some Halloween, we got some Psycho. If you're interested,
we got some Halloween and some Psycho. But I mean, that's just what movies do. That's not like this movie's unique secret sin. Movies just riff on Halloween and Psycho.
Yeah, no, that is indeed. What else? I would say my last big note is that probably the scene that most excites me, that in terms of like this brings something unique to the genre, is that when Yannicka hides a very scared Morten Tobias in the pantry to hide from the killer, she hands him a can of beans and says, "Memorize the label," and that really tickled me.
No, that was a good moment. Again, it's got nice little character beats. Like, these are people in a way, and I like that about it. And I will say, I didn't have any big notes. For me, it was just like, oh, what a completely standardized experience that was. My big note is probably, if a slasher film is going to be this kind of straightforward in presenting its plot, I do like it to have a bit more imagination in its gore effects than this has, which is literally none whatsoever.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about the kills because there's nothing to say about them.
There's nothing to say about them. They happen.
And if the kills
we see a POV pickaxe shot, and that's cool.
Yeah. And the shot of there are shots of dead bodies that are cool.
Yes.
When Eirik finds Ingunn's body in the snow, she's already been killed, but now she is also frozen. That's a creepy image. And then at the end, the killer has all of the bodies on a sled, and he's throwing them into this ravine. And eventually he and Yannicka have a kind of knockdown fight, and she knocks him into the ravine, and him like splattered on the ground next to all the bodies. That is a good tableau.
That is a good tableau. I think the concept of she's buried at the bottom of a pile of her friends waiting for her moment to act, that's a good beat.
Yeah, that is a good beat. Another good beat is when she is investigating that whether or not Eirik is alive in the room where the killer lives, and she has Morten Tobias hiding in the corner, and she says, "Flash the flashlight if you see the killer coming." Mm-hmm. And so obviously there's a point where that starts to happen, and I think the just layout of that scene works really well.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, if the kills, even if the kills weren't bloody, if they were presented in a way that was in any way scary or exciting, even 50% more than they are, this movie would be like a full star higher for me.
Absolutely. Like it has the meat and potatoes done. Like, it's good meat and good potatoes, and it's good enough that I'm sitting there being like, the gravy, where's the gravy? You didn't make gravy. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at with this movie. Like, it's good at the fundamentals. Again, I can come up with at most one scene that I think is not good. And that's not much for a 93-minute film. It doesn't have the pizzazz.
Yeah, there's no spark to it.
Yep.
Except for maybe the cut to the credits where there's an English language song that says "All my friends are dead." That's the opening line of the song.
I mean, that's on the nose in a way that I find charming for this kind of movie. Yes.
Oh yeah, for sure. But that works better in like a Dead Snow type movie that has a bit of comedy in it.
Right. I
this-
guess again, this movie it's well made and fully devoid of personality.
I mean, just like Tomb Raider 2018.
I feel like well made is meeting Tomb Raider 2018 more than halfway there, to be honest. But I take your point.
Okay, it is made. It is not badly made. You can see everything.
Everything is in focus. The camera doesn't tip over. Alicia Vikander exists and interacts with other actors.
Yeah. I like the scene where she's riding her bike and there's paint coming out of the can on the back of the bike. That was a fun scene.
I don't recall it, but I will take your word that it
it's
exists.
like a bike chase thing in London.
I remember
It's like a
the
race.
bike chase because I remember finding it confusing that 1/3 of the running time of Tomb Raider was about a bike chase.
Yeah, and not even related to a tomb in any way.
No.
But yeah, okay. I guess we're done talking about Cold Prey.
I mean, there's just not a lot of meat on these bones. There's just not.
Yeah, it's such a bummer. I was excited to revisit this, and then as it was playing, I was like, oh, fuck, what have I done?
I will say, I think we are going to have a certainly more colorful, if not happier, conversation about our next topic.
Oh, my
this
goodness. So, this was preordained. So, when we put the 5 titles up on the poll for Patreon,
We knew which one would lose that we were going to pick.
Yeah, exactly. As does happen sometimes. But this one actually did win second place in the poll, which is unusual for the one that we choose. But yeah, you can catch us again in 2 weeks talking about I believe it's an MTV original movie, My Super Psycho Sweet 16.
Which I feel that being an MTV original is not necessarily going to solve for the problem of, so where was the gore? But I suspect we'll have other things to compensate, or at least to distract from.
Yes, we better be. I hope it is just a disgustingly mid-2000s soundtrack. That's what I'm hoping for. And MTV has made movies that aren't awful on occasion.
I don't feel like I can think of any MTV movies offhand that aren't documentaries, and documentary perhaps needs to go in quotes, but
Yeah. Well, they were behind Hustle and Flow, which I actually hate, but a lot of people like.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, it's a movie. It's real. It
Yeah,
exists.
that's a real movie. It was nominated it won an Oscar, didn't it?
It won an Oscar, won Best Song.
Yeah, which doesn't mean anything. But they also made Crossroads with Britney Spears, which is not a great movie, but it's better than it has to be.
I don't know how bad you think Crossroads has to be, but I appreciate that is a weird vote of confidence in it.
And they made a really good movie that went straight to Paramount Plus a couple of years ago called 3 Months, starring Troye Sivan. I really liked that movie.
Okay, I will say that things that go straight to Paramount Plus are difficult for me to lay hands on because I am not one of these 7 Americans who has Paramount Plus, as apparently you are.
Oh, I would not rush to categorize myself as such. I did pay for a month of Paramount Plus, and during that month, I watched Orphan First Kill and that Troye Sivan movie, and that's what I got out of it.
Okay, that's fair.
And I ran away screaming into the wind. But anyway, yes. So that's what this is. We'll catch you next time. If you want more reviews and podcasts, you can always go to alternateending.com. In the meantime, and thanks so much for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.